Welcome to Speak Out, Stand Out by Green Communications, where we're learning how to help our kids become better communicators. We believe our voices are the strongest asset we have, and our mission is to empower the next generation to use their voices to make a difference in the world around them. Whether you are a parent, an educator, or are just invested in today's youth, we hope this podcast will help you build confidence in our future, one voice at a time.
Welcome back to Speak Out, Stand Out. I'm Elizabeth Green, and today's guest is Thomas Khalil. Thomas is a former director of MBA admissions and financial aid at his alma mater, the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's an education entrepreneur, edutech investor, and a dad. So, Thomas, we're super excited to have you here. Thanks for your time, first and foremost.
Absolutely a pleasure, Elizabeth. Appreciate you having me on the podcast. Looking forward to the conversation.
And so what we're talking about today is something unique to our podcast. We've not had this discussion before, but with your background in being in college admissions, we're going to be talking about ways that we can build our children up now for the career in the future that they might want to have. Particularly, we're talking a little bit about college, but other things as well, what we can start doing now to support our kids in this. And I mean, me personally, my kids are 10 and 14, so I'm really just on the cusp of starting to envision this future. And I might be behind the ball here. So those are kind of some things we want to talk about. When should we start thinking about that? I guess let's start with that. As a parent, when should we really start thinking about college?
Well, so fantastic. And I know your listeners, some of your listeners right now just had a moment of panic and said, wait a minute, why is she bringing on an MBA admissions guy? My children are 10 and 14. And so I think, you mentioned this in the intro, I am both an admissions professional and a parent. So, I have two different perspectives on this. So I think, as a parent, I have a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. So, right clustered in that age range. And I think that, the important thing to remember here is that when we're talking about admissions, we're talking about, there are very different timelines of admissions, right? Whether you have children who are applying to private kindergarten, private grade school, private high school, college, university, or graduate school, the mechanics are different, but the core essence of admission is the same. Now, for your audience that are thinking, well, wait a minute, right? I'm raising my child to be unique and interesting, and they have all these diverse interests, and I don't want them to be these kind of like super stressed out automatons that are grinding through their high school years, sleep deprived. And as a parent, I am 100% behind that. And one of the things that I don't like about admissions and the admissions industry, for lack of a better term, is that there is a big misperception on the parent and student side of admissions that schools are looking for these superhuman, creatures. These kids that you read about in the Wall Street Journal or, whatever, wherever you get your information or you see on the news, and they've taken 500 APs and, built 2 charities and scaled Mount Everest twice without oxygen to raise, money for orphans in some remote corner of the world. And I think what we need to keep in mind is that those are the headline cases. Right. So when I was running admissions at Wharton, if I had to give a presentation to the board, if I was speaking to a reporter from a big news organization or something, right, you have your little anecdotes. And you say, ooh, look at this sparkly, interesting student, because I don't want to take anything away from them. They are amazing people. I mean, these students at the age of 18 or 16, have done more than, in some cases, many adults with their life. I mean, these are just driven, interesting people, right? But when you look at kind of like a bell curve distribution of any demographic, you have people on the right, you have people on the left, and the majority are in the middle. And so the important thing, as I put my admissions director hat on, is that what you're looking for are just unique students who are self-aware, students who have done things, right? So you can't just not do things and then expect to be admitted to a good school, right? And by good school, I mean the best school for you, right? I don't want to be kind of exclusionary because, I think there's this concept of good schools that is the US News and World Report top 5, 10, 15, 20. And then there's an understanding that the best school for you might not be one of those schools. And you can be immensely successful no matter what your path is, right? So admissions is about really kind of getting underneath the hood and getting past the numbers and understanding what's the essence of this human, right? Are they intellectually curious? Are they kind? Are they involved? Are they active in things that they care about? And that is what admissions is looking for. And all the things, grades and test scores and activity lists and all those things are really just a way to standardize that information so that as an admissions officer, I can look at that data and extract what I need, right? And how and so it's important also to remember that my very favorite question when asked about admissions, my very favorite answer when asked about admissions is it depends, right? Because every student comes to the admissions process with their own set of life experiences. And so it is inherently unfair for us to judge a student that grew up in Manhattan with a student that grew up in a farm in Tennessee, right? Mm-hmm. Two very different life experiences. And so they both might be motivated, intellectually curious, involved in things that they care about, well-respected members of their community. But how they evidence that is going to be, in some cases, profoundly different, right? That doesn't mean that one is more valuable than the other. It just means that you as an admissions officer need to be able to understand the context in which they are achieving things and put that into perspective.
So these are things that are all considered. It's not just looking at a checklist of scores and things like that. You're really you're trying to get an essence of the whole person as much as you can through paperwork.
No, absolutely. And you would be surprised. Honestly, people put a lot of value on the interview. And in many cases, the interview is meaningless because interviews, there's bias on the part of the interviewer. There's some students you interview. We all know people that are not good in person, but are really, really good in small groups. Or, so in general, an interview is a fairly ineffective way to gauge what you need for the admissions process. The essays, the activity list, like evidence over time is by far the most you can really extract as a professional, as a trained professional in this, you can really extract a lot of information out of that if it's done right.
Gotcha. Okay. So we should be then encouraging our kids to pursue things that they're interested in. I mean, obviously we want to do this as parents anyways, but from the perspective of it being important in this realm, you're talking, what age should we really starting to be thinking about what this would look like on a college application? And do we have enough there to put on a college application?
Well, Elizabeth, so it's interesting because, right, as a parent, we understand like our children, they're exposed to so many ideas, right? And sometimes that can lead to kind of decision paralysis, right? And I think back when I was applying to schools, right, way back in the age of the Brontosaurus, it was the admissions officers wanted what was known as the well-rounded student. And so we had to have strong academics, but also play some sports, do some volunteering, and be involved in one or two clubs, right? So you needed to be well-rounded. And what universities have migrated towards now is more depth, right? So what they've said is, okay, if we take a bunch of students who are all well-rounded and we put them together, it's a fairly homogeneous group, right? Mm-hmm. But if I take somebody who is the best biologist, the best sculptor, the best singer, the best mathematician, the best computer scientist, right? And are just deeply passionate about that, then those are really interesting people. And when we put them together, that's where the sparks fly and that kind of magic happens where the sum ends up being great, the whole ends up being greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what you're looking for. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the perspective of parents and students, like, what do I need to do to get in? And not look at it from the perspective of the schools. And what the schools are saying is, look, in some cases I have 20, 40, 60,000 applications. So I have the freedom to build, to craft a class. And so what I'm looking for are people that are just genuinely curious and interesting and have evidenced that, right? Now, does that mean that absolutely highly qualified students are going to be turned away every year? Yes. Right. And that by far is the worst part of admissions. Pardon me. Right. The worst part of admissions is when you're in the committee room and you're having, because of space, right? Because some of these schools have 60,000 applications for 1,000 spots. You're pulling people out that are absolutely qualified. It just, they are, but you're trying to figure out how to craft the class for that year. And so a lot of people will say, well, what about grades? What about test scores? Well, in a pool of 60,000 applicants, I would say conservatively that 70% of those students are academically qualified. Right. I mean, the real number is probably closer to 85, 90%, but even if it's 10%, right? Let's say it's 10%. Let's say I'm wildly wrong, it's 10%. That's 6,000 students for 1,000 seats.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you still have this dogfight for those seats. And so is it an unfair process? Absolutely. So I think as parents, the most important thing that we can do is build curious, self-sufficient children, right? And so one of the weaknesses that I see a lot of times from, when I'm counseling students and working with families are students who have been so protected their whole life, they're incapable of making a decision, right? And so a lot of the work that I do is strengthening that reflex, right? What do you want to do? We need, what matters to you? What do you want to do about that? Because what happens is then they get to the essay, and the essay is asking a very simple question. Who are you? What matters to you? What do you care about? What makes your eyes light up in the morning? And they truly just have no answer because they've been fed the answers their entire life. And the reason you need to break that is because if they go away to college, right, you don't want to be babying your 19-year-old, right? And holding their hand through university. It's like painful to let them go and be independent, but also that's how we grow meaningful young adults, right? That's our role, I think, as parents, is to prepare them to be successful on their own in the world. So,
absolutely. I think personally, we've been, with my oldest being 14, he's now in high school, working through things like that and just encouraging him to, if you don't understand what was supposed to be done with this assignment, then you need to discuss it with a teacher. Mom's not calling a teacher, right? So just little things like that and giving them the authority to speak up and the confidence. But it is definitely hard to let go of. But yeah, it's only a few short years before he's going to be in college and needs to know how to do those things. Well, so it's a little bit of an offshoot question, but we know that for so many years, it was college. Everybody needs to go to college, right? And it was really pushed on us. It was just expected, right? That if you came from a family that could afford it or you could get loans, you were going to go to college. I feel like the tides have shifted a bit. And especially with the evolution of technology and the things our kids are learning today as a freshman in college are going to be wildly different by the time they graduate. Do you think that college is still as important for kids as it was for you and me?
Well, we're going to go right back to my my very favorite answer in admissions. It depends, right? But I think it's a very, very good question, and there are different parts to that question. The first part is return on investment. So college right now is punishingly expensive, and I think that there are a lot of different ways. So let's start with the first case. I want to go to college. Okay. If you want to go to college, I think you need to be ruthless about the return on investment. What is the cost, right? Because going and saddling yourself with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of student loans is a commitment. And there are schools for which there is not a good return on investment. Okay. If you go to Stanford and you take on $150,000, $200,000 worth of loans or more, Is there a guarantee you're going to pay that back? No. But is the probability higher than if you go to a small private college, in Montana? I don't want to pick on Montana as first state that came to mind, but you're not going from that school to, work in finance on Wall Street, for example. Right. So I think you need to be very, very, very ruthless and clear-eyed around what is it that I want to do. Right. So if writing is my passion, I want to go into journalism. Journalism at the moment is not a highly compensated profession. Right. And I love the passion, right? Or teaching, for example. Right. So if you want to be a teacher and you burden yourself with $250,000 worth of loans, that's it. I mean, it's kind of game over. You're never repaying that. Right. And you can't, the way that thing, unless you change careers at some point or something happens. So I think you need to be very clear-eyed around what is it that I think I want to do and how do I best do that? And if you're looking at a career that needs a graduate degree, then maybe you look at, for example, a good state school, right? Because there are state universities that are absolutely fantastic. You get a good undergraduate degree there. And then look, if you think that going to a top, very expensive graduate program is going to help you, then by all means, go do that, right? If you're in a state that has a strong community college, California has a very strong community college system and culture. Texas does as well. New York does, right? Do your first 2 years there and then go graduate from one of the big, UCs or UTs and capture the benefit of that. Because I do think that in many instances, the value of college in terms of maturity, in terms of learning how to think, in terms of learning how to deal with adversity, in terms of the networks that you build, the friendships that you build, all of the good things that go into college, I think are very valuable. And I think also, everybody likes to bring up, well, Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard and Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard. Well, certainly, right? And every week or so, a couple of weeks, there's a Powerball winner, right? So I think, there are people for whom, luck, is very much on their side. And obviously they're smart and they worked hard and I'm not taking away from that, but that is not a reason to not go to school. Right. Because the reality is, if you want to start a company, you certainly can go start a company, but you're going to hit a point where you need to raise capital, you need to form a board, you need to approach venture capitalists, whatever it is you need to do. And whether we like it or not, that diploma matters. It matters in terms of network. It matters in terms of getting your foot in the door and being credible to investors when you're going out and you're asking people, hey, give me $100,000, give me $100 million, right? That does matter. I'm not going to debate whether or not that's fair because it's probably not. And in some cases, it's not necessary. But the next question then is, does everybody need college? And the answer is unequivocally no. And right, you can go in the military, you can go into trade school. It always disappoints me that we do not have a system like Germany where trade school is on par with colleges. It's not valid is the wrong word, is an encouraged and supported career. And it's something where you can make a lot of money and have a very, very good life. That's great. So I think, there are a lot of things, or there are a lot of options out there. So yes, education is changing very, very rapidly. Just be careful where you're spending your education dollars. I think a lot of online courses and a lot of online universities, I just disagree with a lot of their premise. I think they charge a lot of money for degrees that are ultimately not well received or well regarded, right? By HR or by companies or by whatever. And so before you go invest in that, be smart, call. If you want to work in a particular industry, pick up the phone, call a big company, ask to talk to HR and say, hi, I'm Thomas. I'm a high school student, and I'm looking at colleges. And, if you were to hire me out of college, what would you look for? And I promise you that HR professional has probably never gotten that call before. And if you catch them at the right moment, they'll say, you know what? Yeah, let me talk to you about that. Like, this is what we look for. And this is how we would, evaluate that. And this is what may or may not constrain your growth and development at our company.
That's fantastic advice. I'm Former journalist here, so I'm all about picking up the phone and calling, right? Because that's the best way to get answers, is just to do it. Well, so you mentioned earlier, I think this is all fantastic advice. One last thing I want to kind of chat through, especially with our, younger kids. You mentioned we should find what they really are passionate about and encourage that. But that being said, there are still certain things that really are a little like they stand out. There's like bright stars, there's shiny stars on application forms that people could participate in, or certain clubs, things like that. What are some of those shiny stars that we think, this would look really good and I could see my kid really enjoying this. Maybe we should try this out.
So respectfully, I actually have to disagree with the premise, right? Because I think that's and it's a great question, because it's a very typical question that I get. And it's a very, again, like if we think about the two sides, if we think about the parent and student side and we think about the admission side, right? Mm-hmm. So from the parent student side, there's always that quest like, well, Susan did Model UN and was a, president of the school student council and president of the biology club. And she got into my dream school. And so I should do those same things. What you want to do is and I understand this is hard, right? I have a 15-year-old and 13-year-old boy. And there are times when they're deeply passionate about things and times when it truly makes me wonder if, that breathing and speaking and walking are all automatic functions, right? And so it's there is no wrong answer to what you're passionate about and what you want to do. And I think that some of that paralysis stems from this expectation of like, oh, I have to do this, but I don't want to do this, right? So if your child loves sailing or drawing or cooking or whatever it is, right? Have them do that, but have them get deep in it, have them involve other people. So a great example is here in Santa Barbara, a friend of mine's son was an athlete, right? And so his mom was like, listen, you need to go organize a garage because it's a mess in there with all your junk and I'm tired of it. And I'm tired of asking you to go outside and go clean up the garage. So he goes out there and he's like looking through all of his old athletic equipment. And he was like, wow, this is like, there's so much stuff here. So he's like, okay, I'm going to box it up. I'm going to take it down to this Play It Again Sports that's like, used, and I'm going to sell it. And he thought about it and he was like, maybe I could do something more, because honestly, I'm very privileged. Like I'm living a very nice life here. And so he went down to one of the underserved schools and talked to the coaches. And he was like, look, I've got some equipment. Could you use it? Is it good, bad? And they were like, seriously? Yeah, we'll take it all. So he called all his friends and he's like, listen, everybody bring your stuff over to my garage. We're going to clean it up. We're going to sort it and we're going to bring it to this school. And it grew and grew and grew. He built this great organization. They reached out. And by the time he applied to college, they had about 15 other high schools all through California, a couple on the East Coast, and doing this and replicating this model, right? And so that's something where he really was able to make a genuine difference around something he really cared about, right? And it wasn't big and flashy and fancy, but it made a difference in these students' lives. And I've had students who are really interesting, who are interested in cooking or farming or, whatever it is. They're just passionate about it, and if they can, they're involving other students. They're involving their friends, they're bringing people in and just doing really interesting things with it. And that as an admissions officer, because what happens is as an admissions officer, when you're reading application after application, everybody's honestly doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, look at the menu of options available to your child in high school. It's all pretty standard stuff, right? And so a lot of students will say, okay, well, I'm going to start my own nonprofit. I'm going to start my own club. But in general, what most of them do is they start it. They don't really build it out. They don't have a succession plan. They don't expand it. And so as a admissions officer, I see right through that. And you're like, okay, like we're not taking away from the fact that you did that, but also we know exactly why you did that. And yes, you raised a couple $100 or a couple $1,000. And again, great. But again, right? So do what it is that you enjoy. And I think giving your children the permission, for lack of a better term, and the freedom to really pursue that thing, and then help them understand, like, how do we build that out and make it compelling, right?
I love everything about that answer. And I honestly just already feel like a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. And we
Good.
don't need to be trying to check all of the boxes or be a specific person. So, I mean, this has been fantastic. And we're almost out of time, but I do have one more question that I know some people are wondering. A lot of the students that we teach in Green Communications are homeschooled students.
Yep.
Is that a disadvantage when applying for college?
That is a great question. And so when I was running Wharton MBA admissions back in 2005, I remember we had just started to see some homeschooled students. And I remember calling my associate directors together and I was like, listen, how do we read this? How do we treat this? And nobody really knew. So we brought in experts on homeschooling. And this was really kind of the first wave of homeschoolers that were not just like complete, off-grid, living their own life type of students, as parents that were saying, hey, we're going to take control of our child's education and et cetera. And so I think that schools now are very familiar with homeschooling. It is incumbent on the applicant, though, to talk about their experience, right? So obviously you need to be studying an accredited curriculum. That's generally the law in most states. So the curriculum is accredited, but in that application, maybe take advantage of the additional information essay to say, look, I want to give you an idea of what my homeschooling looks like, right? Because the universities are not judging whether or not you're homeschooled, right? There's absolutely no judgment there. And in some cases, they love it because it's a more of a non-traditional applicant. Their main concern, 100% concern, is can this student survive the academic rigor of our institution, right? Because as an admissions officer, some of the most painful cuts you have to make are these students that are so interesting. They're so amazing. They've done such cool things. You might have even talked to them because you read their file and you're like, "What? You're really interesting. I'm going to call you and get more, information on your story." But you look at it in the end of the day and you're like, "Look, it's irresponsible for me. I can't admit this student because they don't have the fundamental academics. They won't survive." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just incumbent on you as an applicant to really kind of get in there and say, this is my experience. These are my qualifications. So for a homeschooled applicant, even though testing is optional now in most schools, I would say you should take a standardized test if you can, because that at least allows you to say, I have a 1510 on my SAT. So even if you have questions on my homeschool curriculum, right, you can't argue with that number. Or take AP tests, for example, right? You take the test. Even if you don't take the curriculum, take the test. You might surprise yourself, obviously study for it, right? Don't waste your time and money just showing up and taking it. But if you get a 4 or a 5, and this is if you're applying to highly competitive schools, right? It may not need that for other schools. So, and I think to find, as a homeschooler, I think, why are you homeschooling? Right? So what are the core values there? And take a very close look at the schools. Do the schools match those core values? And in some cases, homeschool students are like, listen, I love my homeschooling. I love this. I'm going to University of Miami because I want to be surrounded by 100,000 people. And I want to go complete different. I want a totally different experience, right? And another student might say, I really like this kind of like intensive, personalized focus of study, and I'm going to apply to what is my favorite college by far, which is Deep Springs, which is a really cool program. So I encourage your listeners to look it up. And get a very kind of alternative, but intensely intellectually rigorous learning experience. So, be thoughtful about how you're choosing your school list as well. So sorry, very long answer to a very short question. I hope educational.
Yes, no, I think very, very helpful. And again, this has been really, really enlightening to me. And I'm sure that some of our listeners are going to be interested in learning more from you. And you do offer coaching. You have tons of free resources on your website and your own podcast
Yes.
and all of those things, but you also do coaching as well, right?
We do coaching. We have essay review services. Our podcast, admittedly, I go very much into depth into the admissions process because I really believe in democratizing it and making it. There are no secrets, right? We want everybody to have the opportunity to apply and find their path. So, and also, were you to have follow-up questions, happy to come back on and answer those, because this is something, yes, it's a vocation for me, but it's also something I'm deeply passionate about. It's why I left a career in entrepreneurship and venture capital to go into admissions. And it's something that just I love doing. So I'm very lucky to have found that thing in my life that really drives me.
And that's exactly what we want for our kids, right? So finding that right, same thing. So, well, again, Thomas, really, really helpful. All of this information. We'll link to everything in the show notes. So it's easy to go find his podcast, connect on socials, and check out his website for more information. Thanks,
Appreciate
everybody.
That. Thank you so much.
If you are looking for more ways to build communication skills in your kids, grab our free mini lesson on how to craft a polished and professional speech out of thin air, along with 52 fun prompts so your kids can practice every single week. You can find that along with info about our upcoming public speaking and debate courses for kids at greencommunicationsedu.com.